Hi, I'm Corin, and the woman I loved for 20 years walked into court with her new lover and a glass of champagne, ready to bury me alive. She erased everything I built, called me a freeloader, valued my entire life at $10 million, like I was some discounted item on a clearance rack. My name, my work, my worth, vanished. But what they didn't know was that silence remembers everything, and by the time the judge spoke, it wasn't just the glass that shattered. There's a family photo in my mother's dining room that used to hang proudly above the old oak buffet. Everyone's in it, my parents, my older brothers and sisters, their spouses, even a couple of grandkids. Everyone except me. The right edge of the picture was sliced clean, like someone was trying to erase a mistake. That mistake was me. The first time I noticed it, I thought maybe the frame had cracked and they'd trimmed the photo to fix it. I didn't ask. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That's what I always did, let it slide. But Celine noticed. She always noticed. One evening, while we were visiting for Thanksgiving, she pointed at the photo and smirked. "Looks more balanced without you on the side," she said, laughing into her wine. Darius chuckled too, sipping his bourbon like he owned the place. That laugh, it wasn't just a jab, it was a declaration. That moment, I knew, my erasure had already begun. At first, it was subtle. Celine would accidentally leave me out of group texts. Then I stopped getting invited to events. At family dinners, my seat drifted closer and closer to the bathroom. One year, I was seated so close to the powder room that every time someone flushed, the smell of lavender spray mixed with turkey stuffing. But nothing hit me harder than that night, 4 years ago, when Celine stood in the center of my family's dining room, arm linked with Darius, and raised a glass. "To Darius," she said, "for believing in me when no one else did." I was sitting near the restroom trying to chew through dry ham and pretend I didn't exist. My brother nodded along. My sister clapped. Even my mother smiled like it was a wedding toast. No one looked at me. That night, I realized something. I was no longer Celine's husband. I was her placeholder. And Darius? He wasn't just some side fling. He was the upgrade. Later that evening, Celine told a joke about how I once tried to sell an online course and made enough money to buy a sandwich. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I used to be a teacher, then a freelancer, then a ghost. Everything I built, Celine tore down, slowly, smiling, with perfect lipstick and manicured empathy. She told people I couldn't keep a job. She told her friends I had no drive. She told me I should be grateful she still let me come around. I used to think maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I should just grow thicker skin. But then I saw the photo again, last week, when I dropped off a box of my late father's tools, and there it was, still cropped, still deliberate. They'd printed a new copy, they'd replaced the old frame, and I was still missing. Not a mistake, a message. I stood there in the foyer, the box of tools digging into my hip, and stared at the photo. For 10 seconds, maybe longer, long enough for my sister to walk by and say, "You good, Corin?" I nodded. Of course I nodded. What else would I do? Tell her I'd been erased from my own bloodline. Tell her I'd been reduced to an exhale in the background of Celine's new narrative. Tell her I felt like a shadow that used to live in the corner of someone's memory. No, I just smiled and walked out. On the way home, I stopped for gas. I sat in the car, engine off, and stared at the steering wheel. My hands were clenched. I didn't realize how hard until my fingers started to ache. It's funny how pain can hide like that, silent until it throbs. I thought about the years, 2 decades of being the patient one, the calm one, the good guy. All the times I let Celine shine while I dimmed myself down. All the times I convinced myself that love meant silence, that family meant swallowing pride, that being a man meant not crying, not lashing out, not breaking. But you know what? The glass only looks smooth until the crack starts. And that crack started with a photo. That cropped photo didn't just cut me out, it carved something open, something that had been waiting a long time. I just didn't know the war ahead. I didn't sleep that night. The promise I made to myself, never to let them humiliate me again, echoed in my head until the sun came up. I brewed coffee I didn't drink, ironed a shirt I'd never wear again, and sat for an hour staring at the wall. The silence in my apartment felt different that morning. Not peaceful, just empty. By 8:30 a.m., I was parked outside the courthouse, hands cold against the steering wheel despite the heat. I watched attorneys in dark suits walk past my windshield like soldiers headed into battle. I wasn't ready, but I went in anyway. Dallas County Courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and bad news. As I rode the elevator up to the 4th floor, I tried to slow my breathing. Courtroom 4B, divorce court. Just a formality, they said. Just signatures and asset division. But I knew better. When I opened the heavy oak door, I saw them already seated. Front row, of course. Celine wore a red dress I hadn't seen since our last anniversary. Tight, smooth, not an ounce of mourning on her. Darius sat next to her, casual, confident, holding 2 flutes of champagne. My stomach twisted. "Really?" I muttered under my breath. She caught my eye and lifted her glass like a toast. "To freedom," she said loudly enough for the bailiff to hear. I didn't reply. I walked past them and sat alone at our side of the table. Well, my side now. The clerk glanced over, then quickly looked away. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Gavel. Silence. "Ms. Celine Whitaker and Mr. Corin Whitaker," the judge began, voice dry. "We're here to proceed with the division of assets and finalize the terms of the divorce." Celine leaned forward. "Your Honor," she said, voice smooth as butter. "Before we begin, I think it's important to clarify something. My business, my brand, was built entirely by me. Corin was supportive, sure, but he didn't contribute." Twist S3 hit like a slap. She said it with a smile. She said it like I hadn't taken out a second mortgage so she could open her first location. Like I hadn't built her website, answered customer emails, stayed up night after night tweaking her online booking system while she slept on the couch, dreaming of owning the wellness space. The judge raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "And in fact," she continued, gesturing to Darius, "it was this man who helped me expand nationally. Not my husband. My business thrived despite him." Darius leaned in, voice louder than it needed to be. "I mean, Celine was dragging dead weight for years. She could have been so much further if she hadn't had to babysit." Laughter. From behind me. From the other attorney. Even the court reporter's mouth twitched before she caught herself. I didn't laugh. Twist S4 wasn't just Darius mocking me. It was them co-authoring my erasure. I looked down at my hands. They were gripping the edge of the table so tight my fingers ached. Again. Same spot as last night. Same pain. Only this time I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Whitaker, do you wish to respond to that?" Every fiber of me wanted to stand up and scream. Tell them how I worked nights at the auto parts store when Celine was pregnant. Tell them how I canceled my own dreams to bankroll hers. Tell them how I watched Darius move in on my wife while I mowed the lawn, still believing we were going to couples therapy, but I didn't. I straightened my shoulders, looked the judge in the eye, and said, "I have documentation I'd like to submit." No yelling, no scene, just a stack of folders, dates, receipts, timelines, proof. The attorney beside me, who barely knew my name, opened them with a confused expression, as if to say, "You were supposed to be the quiet one." That's the thing about silence. It collects, it remembers, it waits for the right moment, and when it speaks, it doesn't stutter. Celine narrowed her eyes as my documents passed from the judge's bench to her side of the room. She hadn't expected that. She thought I came unarmed. She thought this was her stage and I was the footnote. Darius shifted in his seat. The champagne glass was half empty now. "Is this supposed to impress anyone?" he scoffed. The judge looked over his glasses. "Mr. Taylor, Darius Taylor, you're not a party in this case. Please refrain from speaking." I caught that moment, just a flicker, but Celine's jaw tensed. Her plan had a crack in it, and me, I didn't smile, but I did stop gripping the table. I sat back, hands in my lap, and waited. They thought I had nothing. They were about to learn otherwise. I didn't go straight home after court. I needed air that didn't smell like leather chairs and legal sweat. I ended up parked behind an old diner off Garland Road, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew my name. I sat there for nearly an hour, hands on the wheel, eyes on nothing, just letting everything sink in. She laughed at me in front of a courtroom, called me dead weight while holding champagne. And Darius had the nerve to say she'd built her empire despite me. I could still hear the way they said it, the way the room barely flinched, like I deserved it. By the time I got home, the sun had dipped behind the buildings and the apartment had gone dim. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood inside the doorway, keys still in my hand, letting the quiet wrap around me. No one was waiting, no dog, no picture on the wall, no family. But I did have something left. I walked past the kitchen, past the tiny living room, and pulled open the hallway closet. Tucked behind the vacuum cleaner and a stack of broken electronics was a gray banker's box. No label, just dust. I carried it to the dining table and opened the lid. Inside were layers of file folders, receipts, envelopes yellowed with time. I hadn't touched these in years, not since before she left. At the time, I told myself keeping them was paranoia. Now they were all I had. I sorted through them slowly, utility bills in both our names, credit card applications, tax returns dating back to 2006. My name was there, every time. Next to hers, every signature was mine, proof of every dollar spent to keep her dreams alive. Twist S5 came when I opened a blue folder at the bottom. The original business license for her first spa location, the one she now called her empire, issued in 2011. Applicant, Corin Whitaker. Owner, Corin Whitaker. Celine's name? Nowhere on the form. I stared at the paper like it had just punched me in the chest. That was the year I borrowed from my 401k to help her start. The year I skipped a root canal because we couldn't afford both the lease deposit and my dental work. And now, she strutted into court like I was some barnacle on the hull of her brilliance. I ran my finger along the edge of the form. The corner was bent, probably from being jammed in the back of this box for over a decade. But it was still clear, still legal, still mine. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something other than shame crawling under my skin. I felt ammunition. I kept digging. Old invoices I sent for consulting gigs, statements showing shared bank accounts, even hand-scribbled checklists with her handwriting next to mine, planning launch events. We'd done it together. She just didn't want anyone to remember that part. Then I found the envelope. It was plain white, sealed, no stamp. I recognized the handwriting right away. My father's. Sharp, clean cursive like he was still stuck in the military. I almost didn't open it. He passed 4 years ago. I hadn't read a word from him since. But my hands moved on their own. Twist S6 unfolded as I slid the letter out. Corin, it began. I know you think love means loyalty, and sometimes it does. But don't confuse silence with strength. I see how she talks to you. I see how you shrink when she's in the room. You deserve more than to be tolerated in your own home. Don't let her erase you, son. You matter. I stopped breathing for a second, just stared at the ink. He never said any of that out loud, not once. But he saw it, even when I didn't. A lump rose in my throat and I swallowed it hard. Dad had never been one for sentiment. But this was clarity. From the grave. He knew. He saw the pattern forming before I did, and I ignored it. I folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. I didn't want to smudge the ink. Then I closed the blue folder and stacked it on top of the rest. Celine thought I came into that courtroom with nothing. She thought I'd been too passive, too small, too slow to react. But I wasn't empty. I was prepared. I turned on the dining light and began sorting everything, by year, by category, building the timeline, loan agreements, capital transfers, leases with my name, emails I printed years ago out of habit, now gold. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. I wasn't just fighting Celine anymore. I was fighting the version of me who let it all slide, who mistook quiet for peace, who chose silence over dignity. And that version of me, he didn't make it out of that courthouse. I stayed up most of that night, sorting through files and rereading my father's letter. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. I wasn't tired. I was focused. Focused in a way I hadn't felt in years. maybe decades. When morning came, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, ironed my shirt, and packed every document that mattered into a worn leather folder. Not too flashy, just sturdy enough to carry 20 years of truth. By 8:45, I was parking outside the courthouse again. This time, I didn't hesitate in the car. I walked through those doors like I belonged there, because I did. The hallway outside the courtroom was already buzzing. Lawyers on phones, assistants pacing with files in hand. And then I saw them. Celine in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my car payment, and Darius standing too close, whispering something that made her laugh. That same laugh I used to hear from behind closed doors when she thought I wasn't listening. When she was with him long before she admitted it, she caught my eye, her lips curled into something between a grin and a sneer. No shame, just strategy. They were confident. They thought this was wrapped up already. I sat in my assigned seat, calm, focused, the leather folder resting on my lap like armor. The judge entered. The room stood, then settled. The hearing resumed. Celine was the first to speak, her voice syrupy, calculated. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to reiterate that the growth of my company and my success occurred entirely after I freed myself from unnecessary burdens." The room shifted. A few raised brows. One clerk typed something a little faster. Darius smirked beside her like they were giving a TED talk instead of testifying under oath. She kept going, eyes never meeting mine. I funded the expansions, negotiated every lease, handled all operations. Corin had no part in it. He wasn't interested. He was irrelevant. That word. Irrelevant. It hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just a jab, it was an erasure. A final attempt to rewrite the past in front of strangers who held power over my future, but this time I didn't stay quiet. I sat up. Slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "If you keep calling me irrelevant, Celine," I said, "you may not like what I bring into this courtroom." Everything stopped. Even the clicking of the clerk's keyboard. She turned to look at me for the first time all day. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. A flicker of recognition. A moment where she realized I wasn't bluffing. Darius leaned forward, trying to look casual. "Oh, please," he said with a laugh. "Don't tell me you've got a receipt from a dinner 10 years ago. You forgot to tip?" The joke didn't land. No one laughed. Not this time. I didn't respond to him. He wasn't the one holding perjury in his hand. I kept my gaze steady on Celine. "This isn't theater, Mr. Whitaker," the judge said, voice firm but fair. "Do you have evidence you intend to present?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. But I was advised to wait until after her testimony." The judge gave a tight nod and motioned for Celine to continue, but she didn't. Not right away. Because the tone in the room had shifted. I could feel it. She knew I had something, she just didn't know what, and it scared her. For the first time, I wasn't chasing her. I was standing my ground. The rest of her statement was shorter than before, less performative. She chose her words more carefully. Darius tried once more to interject, but the judge shut it down. "Let Mr. Whitaker respond before we entertain any more commentary." When it was my turn, I didn't start with the business license or the tax returns. I started with something simpler. "I was there," I said. "Every step, every bank application, every signed lease, every marketing flyer we printed at the dining table. I didn't need credit. I was her partner. I wanted her to shine." I paused, let that settle. But I didn't disappear just because she changed the lighting. The judge looked at me carefully. "Do you have documentation?" "Yes," I said, lifting the folder onto the table. "A lot." I didn't open it yet. Not today. I didn't need to, not yet. Today wasn't about winning. It was about warning, letting her know I was no longer the quiet man in the corner, nodding politely as she turned the narrative against me. No, today I was something else, a variable, and she didn't know my next move. I left the courthouse with the folder still tucked under my arm, just like before, only now it felt heavier. Not because of the papers inside, but because of what I hadn't done with them. I'd rattled the cage, sure. But Celine, she kicked the whole damn door open. In today's hearing, she came armed with spreadsheets, meticulously prepared statements, selectively edited screenshots, financial timelines that skipped key dates like they didn't matter. Her attorney flipped through the files with precision, pointing out expense after expense labeled under her name. Meanwhile, every contribution I'd made somehow vanished, like I'd been nothing more than a guest in my own life. She even brought up the years I worked part-time to care for her mother after the stroke. He was between jobs, she told the judge, smooth as glass. He never really held anything down. I covered the mortgage, I built the business, he benefited from it. And just like that, the room tipped. No ruling was made, not yet, but I saw it in their faces, the slight nods, the frowns that didn't come for her, but for me, for the man who benefited. On the way home, I turned off the radio. I couldn't stand noise. My phone buzzed once, just once, but I knew what it was. Probably one of my cousins, or maybe a coworker forwarding the latest message from Darius. He'd taken it to social media now. Quietly, of course. No direct posts, just comments under mutual friends' photos. Things like, hard to watch someone take credit when they never showed up, and glad Celine finally got out. I parked 2 blocks from my apartment, not because there wasn't space out front, but because I didn't want to walk past my neighbors. Lately, I'd felt their stares through blinds, their polite nods sharper than insults. When I finally got inside, I dropped the folder onto the kitchen counter and stood there staring at it. The leather edges curled slightly from years of use. Inside, the truth. Pages of it, my signatures, my work, my sacrifices, all sitting still. I poured a glass of water, didn't drink it, just held it, walked it to the living room and placed it on the table like it might calm me down. But the silence screamed louder than ever. I sat on the couch and sank back, feeling the weight of every word Celine had spoken, every half-truth, every rewritten moment. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing. Because the more I replayed her voice in my head, the more believable it sounded. He never contributed. Over and over, until it echoed like memory instead of malice. Even the letter from my father sat there now like an artifact, something that belonged to a stronger version of me. A man who still had conviction. A man who hadn't let years of silence bury his spine. I grabbed the folder again, flipped it open. Pages rustled like dry leaves. I stared at them, willing them to rise off the paper and shout for me. But they didn't. I closed it. I thought about walking away, about letting her have it all, the business, the story, the applause. Maybe it was easier that way. Let them call me the freeloader, the failure. Let them believe she built it alone. Because the truth, fighting her felt like punching through glass. Every move just cut deeper. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor until my eyes burned. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hollowed out, the kind of empty where even your bones feel tired. Time passed. I don't know how much. The sky outside faded into early dusk, and streetlights flickered on. That's when I heard the ping of my phone again. Another message. I didn't reach for it. I just sat. Still. Because silence used to be my protection. Now it was my prison. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know if I had the strength to crawl out of it. I don't know how long I sat there in that chair, back bent, hands limp over my knees. The stillness wrapped around me like a damp sheet. For a moment, I wondered if this was it. If I'd simply stay like this, let them win. Let Celine rewrite the script, hand it out to the world, and walk off the stage with applause. But despair is dangerous, because sometimes when your head's deepest underwater, the most unexpected thing surfaces. My eyes drifted to the box I hadn't fully gone through. Old file folders, frayed manila envelopes, dog-eared receipts, things I kept more out of habit than strategy. I pulled the box toward me again, letting the smell of paper and dust pull me back into the past. I sifted slowly, dragging my fingers through forgotten pieces of a life I once built with 2 hands, contracts from the first year, invoices I paid when her startup had 0 cash flow, notes she scribbled in the margins thanking me. "Couldn't do this without you, babe," one read. Funny, that same woman just told a courtroom I'd never lifted a finger. Then my hand brushed against something smooth and worn. It was a white envelope, sealed with yellowed tape, wedged at the bottom of the box. No label, no markings. I hesitated for a second, like my fingers already knew what it was before my brain caught up. I opened it carefully. Inside, An original property deed. I blinked, and then blinked again. The deed to the commercial unit where Celine's boutique, her empire, was still standing. But the signature at the bottom wasn't hers. It was mine. Both lines, buyer and co-signer. I reached for my laptop, opened the local property records database, tapped the address in, verified the parcel number. And there it was. My name. Not just as co-signer, but as original owner and majority financier. She had scrubbed this from every court file. Never mentioned it. Made it seem like she bought it herself from day one. But this paper, this single, unassuming document, told another story, one she never expected anyone to keep. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in weeks. Strength. This wasn't just proof, this was leverage. Still, I wasn't done. I kept digging. At the bottom of another folder, half hidden beneath utility bills from 2009, I found a USB drive. Black plastic, no label. I didn't even remember saving anything to it. Plugged it in anyway. What popped up made my heart pause. Old email exports. One labeled joint accounts, startup phase. And in that string of emails, there it was, plain as day. A message from Celine to her accountant dated 8 months before the boutique turned its first profit. Relying on Corin's income for now, but things are picking up. He's been covering rent and utilities, so I can focus full-time on launch. The timestamp, the reply chain, the accountant's note back, it was all there. Unedited. Raw. I scrolled up and down through the thread, rereading it 3 times. I wasn't hallucinating. She admitted it, in writing. All the years she claimed I never contributed. All the eye rolls in court, the sighs, the speeches about carrying me. That narrative fell apart with just a few lines of digital ink. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since this whole mess started, my silence didn't feel weak. It felt wise, because silence remembers. It doesn't need to scream. It collects. It watches. And now, it had spoken. I turned back to the box and began organizing everything. Deeds, emails, contracts, bank statements, all lining up to tell the truth she worked so hard to bury. The night passed without sleep, but not without purpose. By sunrise, my table looked like a war map. Every piece had a place, every document a direction. I didn't need revenge. I needed recognition. I stood, stretched my back, and walked to the kitchen to pour myself coffee, not to survive the day, but to prepare for it. This wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Still, every weapon invites a counterattack, and Celine was never one to fight fair. By the time I arrived at the courthouse the next morning, the fog of exhaustion had burned off, replaced with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My briefcase for once felt heavy in the right way, not with dread, but with purpose. I walked past the double doors without flinching, straight through the murmurs in the hallway, and into that cold courtroom where she and Darius were already waiting. Celine sat cross-legged in a cream blazer and matching heels, tapping her phone while Darius leaned back like a man without consequences. She looked up and met my eyes with a slow, smug grin. Then she tilted her head toward her attorney, whispering something that made both of them chuckle. Darius even gave me a mock salute. Let them laugh, I thought. But then her attorney stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce a new exhibit." He handed the bailiff a folder. I watched it move through hands like a spark waiting for fuel. The judge opened it, his brow furrowed. "These bank records," the attorney announced, "suggest that Mr. Rourke transferred funds out of joint business accounts into private accounts in his name during the years in question." Gasps rippled through the small gallery. Someone from Celine's side whispered, "Knew it." I didn't move. The judge looked up. "Mr. Rourke, do you have a response?" My heartbeat was steady, but my jaw clenched. This wasn't a surprise, not entirely. Celine always had a plan B, and if the truth didn't serve her, she'd bend lies into shape until they looked legitimate. "They're fabricated," I said, my voice even. "That's not my account number. The routing code, it belongs to a California bank. I've lived in Texas for 23 years. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of that?" I do, I replied, reaching into my briefcase slowly. But before I could pull out the documents, another voice rose from the back. Your Honor, came the clear, confident tone of a woman. We all turned. Honora, my sister. She walked toward the front of the courtroom without waiting for permission, holding a simple photo frame in her hands. I hadn't seen that frame in years. It used to sit in my mother's living room before Celine insisted we declutter the place. I know I wasn't on the witness list, Honora said, but I think the court deserves to see this. She handed the frame to the clerk who brought it to the judge. It was an old family photo, our parents, Honora, me, and an empty space where I used to be. Cut out. Literally. She turned to the gallery, eyes fierce. That's what they've done to him. Erased him from the story. In court, in family gatherings, in business records. Celine didn't just forget Corin. She removed him. The judge looked at the photo, then at me. For a second, just a flicker, his face softened. I looked at Honora, stunned. She nodded, as if to say, You're not alone in this. Celine's expression shifted. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Darius fidgeted, glancing around as the mood shifted. It wasn't over, but the tide was pulling differently now. I stood, retrieved my folder, and walked slowly to the front. Not with panic, not with rage, with weight, because now the silence had spoken, through photos, through forgotten receipts, through the sister they assumed would stay out of it. I placed the real documents on the table, bank records with official seals, notarized deeds, timestamps from secure servers, the real story, line by line. I didn't speak a monologue. I didn't need to. Let the truth do its job. Inside, I still burned, still shook at what she was willing to do, but I wasn't collapsing anymore. I was calculating. They thought erasing me would be easy. But sometimes the smallest detail, a photo, a signature, is sharper than any lie. And with that photo on the table, I knew it was time to bring out the documents that would end this once and for all. I barely slept that night. Not from nerves, not anymore. It was a strange kind of focus, the kind that arrives when there's no more space for doubt. By dawn, I had gone through every folder, every signature, every printout. I double-checked timestamps, labeled them clearly, and I placed them into a slim black binder, the same kind Celine used to carry when she pitched to investors. There was something poetic in that. When I stepped into the courthouse that morning, the air inside was heavier. The gallery, which had once been half empty, was packed now. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months, former co-workers, even people I didn't recognize and probably friends of Darius, or folks who'd only heard one side of the story and came to watch the final blow. Celine entered moments later, heels sharp against the floor, Darius following behind her like he was strolling into a celebration. She smiled as if she were walking down a red carpet, not into a courtroom. I watched her scan the room, make eye contact with people she had charmed for years, and nod with the confidence of someone who believed the ending was already written. I sat quietly, binder in my lap. The judge entered. The room hushed. Celine's attorney stood. Your Honor, today we have a valuation expert present to help conclude this matter with fairness and clarity. He gestured toward a man in a tailored suit who adjusted his tie and spoke like he was pricing a car, not 2 decades of a life. Based on current records, projections, and business growth since Miss Celine Wentworth's solo leadership, he said, we estimate her contributions far exceed Mr. Rourke's. Therefore, we recommend a $10 million payout as final compensation for the marital assets shared. I didn't flinch, but I felt the way people shifted in their seats. Some chuckled. One person muttered, guess that's all he's worth. Celine looked directly at me, not with pity but with triumph. Her eyes said it all. Game over. I stood. The judge looked over. Mr. Rourke, do you have something to present? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, voice calm, hands steady. I walked up with the binder and handed it to the bailiff. Inside are original property deeds, I began, signed and notarized, ownership documents placing me as the sole financial backer of what later became Celine's current business, contracts showing my role in the foundational years, and an email chain from Celine, dated and verified, admitting that in the early years she relied fully on my income to fund the company while she built its brand. The judge opened the binder. The room went completely still. I could hear paper shifting as he flipped through. Then he read aloud, "Corin, I know I couldn't have done this without you. Your paycheck, your hours, your patience. It built this." The words echoed like thunder. Celine's face dropped. Darius shifted in his chair, adjusting his cuffs like it might save him. The smirk had vanished from Celine's mouth. Her lips parted, then closed, as if she was trying to summon a rebuttal, but her throat couldn't find one. "For years," I said, louder now, "I was the shadow in the photo, the man behind the curtain, the punchline to their cocktail jokes, the so-called freeloader." I turned toward the crowd, the neighbors, the former friends. "But here's what they never showed you, the receipts." A silence hung so heavy you could feel it in your bones. Celine didn't move. Darius looked like he wanted to. The judge continued reading, slowly, methodically. Each page in that binder pulled another thread from the illusion they had spent years stitching together. I sat down, heart steady. Vindication isn't loud. It's quiet, surgical. And in that moment, I didn't need revenge. I just needed them to see it. Not just the court. Them. The ones who whispered. The ones who laughed. The ones who never asked for my side. Because now they didn't need to ask. They could read it. In her own words, when the judge finally spoke, even Celine's champagne glass couldn't hold steady. She had brought it again. A glass flute, this time rimmed with sugar like it was a party. Darius leaned back in his chair, his arms folded like the outcome was inevitable. I sat straight, hands resting on the edge of the table. No need for show, no need for smiles. The courtroom was still packed. Same faces, same air of curiosity, and thinly veiled judgment. But the mood was different. Something had shifted since the binder. Even silence carried weight now. The judge cleared his throat. "After reviewing all exhibits submitted into evidence," he began, "including documentation of financial origination, contractual participation, and email correspondence between the parties." Darius whispered something in Celine's ear. She half smirked. It was the same rehearsed expression she'd worn at fundraisers, court appearances, press interviews. Confident, camera-ready, untouched. The judge didn't look at her. He looked at the binder. "This court finds in favor of the petitioner, Corin Rourke." The words landed with the weight of a hammer. "All joint assets, including real estate, business equity, and financial holdings, are hereby awarded to Mr. Rourke." There was no shouting, no loud objection, just a clink. Celine's fingers, always elegant and precise, trembled. The glass slipped from her hand. It didn't just fall, it shattered. Sharp, loud, decisive. Every head turned. Even the gavel came down a second late. Her breath hitched. She looked down as if the glass might offer an answer. Darius reached out, but she pulled her hand away like it burned. For a moment, we were all frozen. I didn't say a word, didn't move. And then, slowly, I gathered my papers. The same ones that once sat forgotten in a dusty file box beneath a desk no one visited. I didn't look at her, not out of spite, out of clarity. There was nothing left to see. She had told the world I was irrelevant, a burden, a man worth 10 million and not a cent more. She had danced into court with her lover, with bubbles and bravado. But what she didn't bring was truth. And truth, it turns out, doesn't pop like champagne. It cracks like glass when you grip it too tight. As I walked past the gallery, I heard hushed voices. "That's him, the husband. Did you see her face?" One woman whispered, "She looked like someone had drained all the light out of her." I didn't take pride in it. There's no joy in watching someone fall, even when they tried to bury you first. But there is relief in knowing the world finally sees what you saw all along. Outside, the Texas sun hit hard, but the air felt cleaner than it had in years. I stood on the courthouse steps and closed my eyes. Behind me, the noise of the crowd filtered out into the parking lot. Ahead of me, nothing grand, just space. Possibility. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood still and breathed. 20 years doesn't just disappear in a ruling. It doesn't fold neatly into a verdict. It lingers, in the form of habits, scars, things left unsaid. But now, at least, I carried those scars differently. They weren't reminders of failure anymore. They were proof that I'd survived. I walked toward the edge of the lot where my car waited, the same beat-up sedan I'd driven through thick and thin. Before climbing in, I turned once more toward the courthouse. Behind those walls, I'd been erased, then written back in. And now I held the pen. Have you ever had someone try to erase you from your own story? Did you fight back, or did you let silence speak for you? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.